Welcome back to overnightaccountant.com, where we're teaching you about realtors and reducing your taxes. In this section, we're going to discuss an introduction to Schedule C, and then we're going to provide some important notes about Form 1099 miscellaneous. This is very important because I need you to understand when you may need to file a Form 1099 miscellaneous, and we'll go over that in just a few minutes. But first, let's go over an introduction to Schedule C. Here you go. Of course, Schedule C is a profit and loss statement for business. Basically, that means you're a sole proprietorship. In other words, you're a single owner of an unincorporated business. You're an individual realtor. That is you. So it basically means you're in business for yourself. You're not part of a partnership, which means you would actually have an EIN number and have to fill out a separate form. 99% of you guys watching it, I'm fairly certain you're an individual realtor, and you need to file Form Schedule C, and that's what this course is about. All right, Schedule C is 2 pages long. I'm sorry, you really probably can't make that out very well on the screen because it's really condensed, but that's basically what it looks like. And here's the previous side of it. We're just going to very briefly give you a little overview of the sections. I know most of you guys are either using a professional, which we prefer, or you're using your own software, which is basically going to complete this form for you. But I just want to make sure you're aware of just generally what the different sections on it mean. So right here you have your business information, and it's a bigger Schedule C. You can see right there, that's the top portion there. So I'll take back up a second. All right, there's your business. Basically, you put your name and address. Important number thing here we'll go over in a minute is your business code. And you get some other information here. We're going to go over these 2 items here a little later. That is your questions regarding Form 1099 miscellaneous, which you need to be aware of. Again, that's how it looks on the form. Okay, now here's your business activity code section. This is a very important number, and if you're using your own software, you might have a very hard time finding this. However, the code for real estate agents is right here. It's 531210. So you want to use that code. Now this code is very important to the IRS, and as I may have mentioned earlier, based on whatever code you put in there, the IRS computers are going to look at this return and they're going to kind of match it up to how they think the return should look. So if you have any really crazy numbers on your return that are out of whack with what they expect to find on a form with this business code for real estate agents, that's when you can cause yourself problems or possibly be audited by the IRS. This is one of the things where they call about red flags. Any number that's completely out of whack with what they feel is going to be in there, it can potentially lead to some interaction with the IRS. Now, of course, randomly you can always be selected for audit, but the business code really informs the IRS of what type of business you are and what they should really anticipate to see on that return for your type of business. Here's the second section, which we're going to go over here later in the course, of course. Here's your income section, and that's basically where you report your income from your business. That's why it's called the income section. You're not going to have to use very many of those lines because as a real estate agent, you're really not producing anything, so you don't really have what's called cost of goods sold. Okay, here's your expense section, and as you can see, here's where your expenditures are reported. Next section here is your home office and profit. We're going to go over your home office in detail at a later section. This is where you report your home office information. Usually you use a different form for your home office unless you're using what's called the simplified method to calculate your home office, but don't worry about that now. We'll go over this later. Okay, you can see that's what it looks like on the return, that section. Here is actually a cost of goods sold, and you see I have an NA on there because for real estate agents, you really are not going to have a cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold section, on the return is really used to report if you're manufacturing a product. This is where you put your cost of goods sold information. So you can see that's how it looks on page 2. We are now on page 2. This is going to be a very important section for most realtors. You may actually have to use a different form for it depending on how you're reporting your vehicle or how many vehicles you have that you use for business, but that is your vehicle information section. It is on the middle of page 2 of the return of your Schedule C. And here's your other expenses section. This is where you're going to report, you probably have quite a few items reported in this section. This is really where you report expenses that don't show up on one of the other lines of the return. Now you see that's how it looks on the bottom of page 2. That's really it for this section, just a brief overview of Form Schedule C. Now let's get into the notes I discussed earlier on Form 1099 miscellaneous. And this is very, very important. Form 1099 miscellaneous. You must send a Form 1099 miscellaneous. Let me back up a few seconds here, or a little bit earlier we had the discussion on Form 1099 miscellaneous. You should be receiving a Form 1099 miscellaneous from your broker. Or your brokers, if you have more than one, reporting to the IRS and to you the income that you receive from your business as a real estate agent. Well, just like your broker should give you that 1099 miscellaneous, there are certain instances where you need to give Form 1099 miscellaneous to individuals who may work for you. And often many real estate agents are surprised to learn that, but there are instances where you have to send this form out. It's very important that you do for reasons we'll discuss here in just a moment. Now, you pay any individual or an unincorporated business more than $600 during the year. That's when you need to provide Form 1099 miscellaneous, and this applies if you pay that individual $600 or more, or an individual or an unincorporated business. Corporations, you generally don't need to send Form 1099 miscellaneous to if you're a realtor. However, for services, not stuff, for rents or for rents related to your businesses. So this is for services that you may obtain from somebody during the course of the year. Just to give you an example, say you have a listing and you want somebody to mow the lawn for that listing, and you pay them, or maybe you have several and you have the same individual mow these lawns for you, to keep the properties looking good for the potential buyers, and you pay them over $600 over the course of the year. Most likely, if they're not incorporated, which seldom are, if they're not a large business, if it's more of an individual or a small business owner, you need to send them a Form 1099 miscellaneous. It's very important that you understand that. And there's other examples here for bookkeeping possibly. If you have a bookkeeper, you pay them more than $600 over the course of the year. Repairs, you have somebody, I know a lot of real estate agents will actually outsource or hire somebody to place signs for open houses and that sort of thing. If you pay them over $600 during the year, 1099 miscellaneous may be required. Web design, any consultants, and there's anybody in there. Remember, this is for services, not stuff that you buy, not things. So just make sure you're aware of that. And it's very important because on your W-2, there are now what we call 1099 gotcha questions. And these started in 2011, and it's basically 2 questions were added to the Schedule C and actually all business returns to make sure that you are filing the Form 1099s miscellaneous if you're required to do so. And you must answer these questions under penalty of perjury, and you do that when you sign your tax return. So it's very important you understand this section. And there's a very serious penalty for not filing those forms if the IRS actually discovers that you were required to do so. And we're not going to go over those in details, but just to let you know, that can be up to $1,000 for each 1099 that you were required to file. So this is getting very serious. I mentioned earlier that in an earlier section, I believe I mentioned about how the IRS knows that small business owners are really the largest cause of unpaid taxes in the United States. And one of the basic reasons for that is because they know small business owners aren't filing this form when they're required to. That's why they have the gotcha questions, and that's why there's very large penalties. Here's the gotcha questions. You can see them here. You can hardly see them. I tried to enlarge them and put them on the screen, but even if I tried to crop that section out and enlarge it, it didn't turn out too good. So I'm just going to show you what they are. 2 questions. Did you make any payments during the year that require a Form 1099? And you notice this is not just Form 1099 miscellaneous. It refers to any Form 1099. 1099 miscellaneous is the most common form, but that's the first question. They're going to ask you yes or no. That implies that you know the rules for Form 1099 because you have to answer yes or no on that question. Second question is, if yes, did you actually file them or do you plan to file them? So that tells the IRS based on your Social Security number or your EIN number. Most of you guys are probably going to have a Social Security number. They can actually cross-reference that and say, well, hey, you answered these questions here. Let's see if you actually sent in those 1099s. And if you didn't, guess what? You might be getting some correspondence. Or if you answer no, you weren't required to file any, and the IRS later finds out you were supposed to file them, you just lied on your tax return. And that is an intentional disregard penalty. And again, that's where the $1,000 per return can come into play. So this is getting very serious. Most common reasons for filing Form 1099 miscellaneous, if this applies to you, it's going to be Box 1 rents, and that's Box 1 on Form 1099 miscellaneous. That's when if you rent space, or if you rent an office, say, over the course of a year, even if you pay your broker possibly for renting your space at their office, if they require you to do so, you could be required to give them a 1099 miscellaneous with Box 1 completed. Most common one, though, for most of you folks is going to be non-employee compensation, the same box that you're going to receive from your broker showing non-employee compensation. That's Box 7. Now, we do have a course, but this is not a course we're going to go into great detail on Form 1099 miscellaneous. We do have actually a course and a training course on Form 1099 miscellaneous. So if you're interested in learning more about Form 1099 miscellaneous and how to complete them, and if you're required to complete them, we definitely invite you to take our course. So that's it for this section, and we will catch you in the next section.